All right, well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the first workshop for the City of Elk Grove Smart City project. My name is Christopher Jordan. I'm the Director of Strategic Planning and Innovation for the city, welcoming you to this. We've got a good session planned today, so thank you for joining us. Before we get too far started down, a couple housekeeping items. First off, we are recording this event and we will be posting it to the city's website in a couple of days. Once the video is finished compiling, we have to process it for closed captioning and then get it up on the website. So just bear with us on a few days as we get that completed. We do have video and audio for our attendees turned off right now. We'll be turning the video on after the presentation so we can go through an engagement exercise that we have planned, a good opportunity to get feedback. We've got some creative ways to do that, so look forward to that after the presentation. Certainly, if you have questions at the end, you can use the raise hand or Q&A feature in order to do that, but we'll have our larger discussion going on. In terms of the agenda for today, we'll go through introductions with the staff and team that we have assembled for the project in a moment. We'll then go over some workshop objectives and background on the project while we're working on this effort. We'll have a brief history of smart cities, talk about what they are and some example projects from other places and what folks have been able to accomplish under the concept of a smart city. We'll talk about our project and the process and principles that we're looking at moving forward with, and then provide you an opportunity to provide your input on what maybe the principles are and some areas that we could look at for potential projects and activities under the umbrella of Smart City. And then there's just a general discussion opportunity and other questions and answers that we can provide. Certainly we can go over that then. So with that, I've introduced myself, Christopher Jordan, again, Director of Strategic Planning and Innovation for the city. I'm joined on the project by Carrie Whitlock, who is our Strategic Planning and Innovation Program Manager. And then on the consultant team side, the city has retained CityFi to help us with this and their subconsultant MIG. So joining us from CityFi today are Story Bellows, Kate Garman, and Chelsea Lawson. And then Dan Amsden from MIG will be helping us with the outreach portion at the end. So some objectives for the workshop today. And first off, I do want to mention that there are a multitude of outreach opportunities throughout this project. We're only just getting started. So there'll be other opportunities to provide feedback and input on the effort. But today we want to focus on sort of what it means to be a smart city and what some direction the city could take, where we've been to date, and maybe why we're moving forward, some ideas that are out there to consider. So it's an opportunity for you to help craft and provide feedback on where this plan could ultimately go. What's the right approach for Elk Grove as a smart city? What are the things we ought to be considering and focusing on, some of the broader umbrella pieces to look at there? And then also looking at what sort of pilot projects or long-term planning efforts we could be undertaking within the context of a smart city. I want to start by highlighting some of the things we're already doing. If you go up to our website today, you can find our open data portal where we provide access to budget information and other various data pieces about the city. Folks are able to peruse that data and get access to it and analyze it as you would desire to and understand what's going on at the city. Our Geographic Information Systems, or GIS platform, also has an online presence. People can go online, query out information from our GIS data. Much of it is available. If you want to make your own maps or take a look at the data and do some sort of geospatial analysis with it, there's other data that we keep, that may not necessarily be on our open portal, but we use across the city for a variety of reasons. This can include our zoning and general plan land use information. We have things like street lights and our street infrastructure that's in our GIS platform, drainage infrastructure, sort of a host of information that we can spatially map and analyze and understand in some regards what's going on across the city and how we utilize those resources. We've been wrapping up a data audit across the organization to understand how we use data in our decision-making process, what data we collect, what data would be nice to have to use towards making decisions. So that is an effort that we think dovetails in nicely here, but really sets the stage for how we make good decisions. On the police side of the house, they recently completed a real-time information center, which is a location within the City Hall complex where they can monitor goings on. We've got a variety of cameras at traffic lights that they're able to connect to and use that for real-time monitoring. If there's a large event or incident that's occurring in the city, we can activate the RTIC, the Real-Time Information Center, as a means of gathering information and helping disseminate it out to staff that are in the field working that event or incident. Likewise, police has started a UAV program, or unmanned aerial vehicle program. This is where we use small drones. It's all line of sight technology where the pilot, one of our officers, is able to deploy that unit, and they have to keep an eye on it and be able to see it from where they're stationed, and then can use that in an incident. We used it pretty extensively last 4th of July to monitor illegal fireworks and use that for deploying staff in order to follow up on those incidents. On the traffic side of the house, we've got an extensive ITS network, and we're planning on making a lot of upgrades to it in the coming years. And one example of how those improvements are helpful is our Green Wave project, where we've gone through and done timings and reprogramming of our traffic signals, modifying delay experience at intersections in order to improve traffic flow across the city. And we're looking at expansion of those programs and opportunities in the coming years. About 2 years ago, we wrapped up an autonomous and connected vehicle readiness plan. So this looks at the future that may be coming with personal vehicles, the data that's going to get collected as part of those, and being able to leverage that data in order to improve our traffic operations. From an autonomous vehicle perspective, sort of what maybe it takes from an infrastructure perspective to support those. What does it mean overall to the city when those sorts of vehicles exist, and how they'd be utilizing our roadway network? And just generally what sort of preparations the city can make in advance of that technology. And then lastly, obviously the last year with COVID and all the changes it's meant from an employer perspective, we've had much of our staff working off-site. We're looking as things change and the guidance coming out of state and federal health folks, authorities of starting to bring our staff back into the office and resuming more traditional operations. But certainly there's going to be changes in how workplaces operate. So what things the city can do as an employer, what changes we may provide in terms of how our daily lives are structured. And then similarly, those sorts of activities will likely happen in the private sector as well. So what sort of connections are there that we should be prepared for? So it's an operation not just from an employer side, but also from a land use perspective. So with that sort of background, there's a lot of stuff that's going on that we think fits within this larger umbrella of being a smart city. So where do we go from here? What does this really mean to Elk Grove, and where could we take this in the future? So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Story, who's going to go through a history of smart cities and some ideas. Story.
Thanks so much, Christopher. And I can promise that this will be a brief history. And I don't know that anybody is in position to give a fully exhaustive history of smart cities, but if you could go to the next slide. This is an issue that we have societally been talking about for over 100 years. The Scientific American cover on the left is from 1910, looking at how Chicago was managing or trying to solve its rapid transit problem by separating uses at various grades to ensure more public safety. I think when you also look at some of the issues we're dealing with today, this image doesn't necessarily provide the type of high quality urban experience where someone might want to sit outside and actually enjoy a meal or something like that. But it does just signal that these are topics that have been really front of mind for cities and for communities for a really long time. And as we go to the next slide, please, what we're dealing with now is not just isolated issues or bringing new technology to cities, but we're dealing with that in the context of all of these various compounding factors. A year and a half ago, if we were doing this work together, one of us from the CityFi team probably would have gotten on a plane to deliver this kind of presentation and do a workshop in person. And while there are certainly things that have been lost in not doing that, there are real benefits in terms of being able to engage with multiple members of our team and bring different perspectives to various conversations. Notwithstanding some of the other benefits when we talk about climate and the greenhouse gas emissions, that are consistent with us hopping on planes anytime we want to go participate in a couple hour-long conversation. But the challenges in terms of how cities are responding to public health crises, to natural disasters, man-made disasters, events planned and unplanned, and the realities of our political cycles are significant. And smart cities need to be in a position to be resilient, to be regenerative when some of these disasters come and face us and impact our cities. But we also need to put ourselves in better positions, and we see smart city strategies and plans as being critical to cities enabling themselves to bounce back from various challenges that we're facing, all different types of challenges. And so smart cities have always sort of been at the core of thinking about how we change and how we evolve. So Christopher, next slide, please. And as we've gone through this smart city movement, it really started thinking about what we would like to call a clockwork city, really management, IT sort of heavy focus, but on the logistics of getting a city operating more effectively. So that like the buses are actually running on time. This is what the clockwork city was focused on. And then we evolved a little bit more, probably, say GovTech 2.0 to this open city, where it was really focused on citizens. The government was the enabler. There were all of these civic hackers and developers working together with the city to make the city a little bit more legible. So if the clockwork city was about ensuring that the bus was on time, the open city allowed some developers to get together and build an app so that you could, on your phone, see exactly when the bus was coming and know that you could, go outside your door and catch that bus 5 minutes, after you left your home. And then where we see ourselves now is a notion that we call the emergent city, where the government is one of many participants. Maybe we're not just knowing when the bus is coming, but we have a new transportation system that is partially driven and provided by government, but it may involve a number of other actors. So we look at some of the transportation as a service companies like Lyft and Uber that have spread like wildfire in many of our communities. We're thinking about experimentation. You're thinking about how you can contribute back to the way the systems of a city actually function. And next slide, please. And these all require a lot of and are enabled by new technologies. And so they start with all of these things that have sensors on them. It could be our trash cans so that we know that we're not picking up trash cans until they are actually full, or our benches that are the light that is nearby goes on when that bench is actually occupied. And these are all communicating through various technologies so that we can make better decisions. And this is, I think, a really important part of smart cities that does focus on and is driven in some case by the opportunities created by so many of these new technologies that we see. Next slide. And so this can happen in a really beneficial manner. These technologies can have a meaningful impact on how people navigate a city, whether that's a crosswalk providing some extra time for a slower walker to cross the street, or a street light with a sensor embedded to ensure that a fire truck or an ambulance doesn't have to wait on a red light. or a public Wi-Fi spot that allows someone to figure out an alternative route for their journey, or download a library book while they're waiting for a particular mode of transportation. It allows us to really understand what's happening in our cities in real time. Next slide. And so here's a definition that we like to use and we think is beneficial, where it says a smart city is where there is effective integration of physical, digital, and human systems in the built environment to deliver a sustainable, prosperous, and inclusive future for its citizens. And I think one of the things that we often, as we talk about new technology and smart cities, actually, let's jump to the next slide on that, is that it's not just about technology. Technology is not the panacea. This really is about how do we deploy new technology to solve problems that are real problems for people. So for us at CityFi, we think it's really critical that we invest in people, in policy, and in process. And that's where innovation can have a real impact, where smart cities can guide, smart city technologies can guide the way that we may navigate our cities, but we're deploying those technologies with people at the center of the decisions that we make. And so at CityFi, we typically use a human-centered design process where we do focus on people first. We believe that people and companies and new technologies can all come together to create better outcomes in our cities. But we need to ensure, next slide, that we start these conversations with a shared understanding of the values that we hold in our communities. And so this is a graphic that we will come back to, I think, many times through this entire process of working with the city of Elk Grove, as we have with other clients in both the public and private sector. At CityFi, we do work with companies large and small. We work with cities and communities large and small, as well as a number of nonprofits, really looking to think about how do we bring the resources available to our communities together to deploy those in ways that are going to have a meaningful impact for communities, that are going to have a positive impact on the planet, and also we think have a positive impact on the bottom line. And so what we'll focus on the most today is talking about this orange section here at the top on values, vision, and mission. We think it's really critical that we all articulate and start to discuss these topics before we get down to specific technologies or tactics or resources, because the values and the vision and the mission don't change. These hold pretty steady. And in the pace of change, the new technologies that we are seeing, being thrown at us, I'm sure Christopher and Carrie have companies pitching them all the time for new ideas for things that they would like to see deployed in Elk Grove. If you don't have a really clear vision and you don't have really clear values and then a mission, it's hard to understand what technologies and what tools and what ideas are actually going to benefit you in service of becoming the community that Elk Grove actually wants to be. And so we're really excited to be at the beginning of this process and working together to develop a framework through which the city of Elk Grove, and I mean that broadly, where it's city government, residents, businesses, et cetera, can all work together to think about how new tools and resources can be deployed to solve some of the real challenges that are facing Elk Grove, and also meet the opportunities that are being presented. And so with that, I think, Christopher, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Story. So as Story mentioned, we're trying to come up with this strategy or this idea of where is it that we're going? What does this mean to be a smart city? And I'm just going to go ahead and jump to this next slide. We think at this point there are sort of 3 pillars or working areas that we can be focusing on. Those being proactive community engagement, data-driven decision-making, and inclusive innovation. And we'll go through some examples here in a moment about what we think, some examples of how these ideas could be implemented, sort of thinking through as what do these mean. But I think broadly speaking, these touch on common core elements that function across the city. So by that I mean, certainly we want to have an engaged community that's part of the decision-making process, that's providing input on the decisions that are being made and making sure that we're going in the direction that is in the best interest of the community. But the decisions that we're making should be based on facts. What's the information we need to make an informed decision? What data can help us in that process? How can we leverage the data in our decision making? Are we collecting the right data? Are we collecting it in the right ways? Are we using it to inform our decision making process? And that as we're doing these things, that we're inclusive across all sections of the community, that we've thought of the various needs. The story mentioned the idea or the concept of human-centered design, which is something we're getting into in a number of ways. We're doing a great outreach effort right now with youth to understand how we can be engaging with them in the process and having them participate in collecting feedback and using it in decisions. So making sure that we're touching all sectors of our community is important. So at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Dan, who's going to walk through a couple of examples. Dan.
Hey, Christopher. Good morning, everyone. Dan Amazon with MIG. So as Christopher mentioned, really the core starting point or this first pillar is proactive community engagement. And what we mean by that is as data comes in, as we're thinking about how we use technology to address solutions or address challenges, understanding really what those challenges are with the community in mind. And this really starts with reaching the full community with many different ways and formats on how we engage everyone within the decision-making process and are collecting input, collecting ideas, really leveraging, I think, a lot of creative methods for how we're gathering input and ideas and information as well, and ensuring this is an open and inclusive process. So some of these creative methods, we'll be talking about sensors and other technology to create data, but also using the community as these great users of our physical space. And this example from Santa Rosa that you see on this screen is a neighborhood survey of defining the heart of your neighborhood, the boundary of your neighborhood, but also a needs assessment on the neighborhood as well. And this is over 1,000 respondents and tons of information, but it's also spatial and getting fine-grained as well. So it's collecting a lot of data with the community's help and support. Next slide. So another example of this, and I think this is important throughout the process, not just at the beginning, but how we're using the technical or sensor data and also the community data. So this is another example of 2 projects in the South Bay of the Bay Area, Mountain View and San Jose. But the example on the left is data gathered around safety and mobility of different street networks within the city of Mountain View. So where there's pedestrian injuries, bicyclist injuries, motor vehicle accidents. So this is data being brought back to the community. So the community understands, okay, where are some of these safety hotspots and issues and pinch points? But on the right, again, is another one of these user surveys, but each of those colors is a different type of category, whether it's safety, beautification, or other improvements for a corridor. So it's blending and combining this data from the community and also just technical analysis as well. Next slide. Really key to this is equity and inclusivity as part of this process with engaging the community and making sure people have access to technology to take surveys, but also to engage in their activities, understand information, have access to information. And there's many ways to do this. Christopher mentioned kids being involved in a lot of this engagement activity, which is becoming huge. And even just text messaging or having cell phones is enormous technology to help folks get really involved in the process and provide feedback and responses and real-time information. Next slide. So example of how this could then be deployed is several cities are doing this. San Francisco is one that's leading this, but having real-time monitoring of trash pickup, when cans are ready to be picked up, what type of materials are in those different trash cans, when you can bring your cans back into the house, all this information. So it's providing the benefit back to the community as we're creating these new systems or new technologies.
Perfect segue. Hi, everyone. This is Chelsea Lawson from CityFi. And you'll notice that there's a lot of overlap between these three pillars in general. Data is very helpful in terms of outreach. And here I'll also share how it can be used to make decisions and then some best practices around that. So waste is a really good example. And I have an image of that here as well, of how you can use technology to collect data and ultimately better understand how the city works. As a best practice, sharing that data to the public not only helps with engagement and building trust, but people in the community can also use that data in ways that you wouldn't expect. And before I came to CityFi, I used to manage the open data program at LA and in LA, and we saw a number of examples there of people using foreclosure data to understand what's happening in their neighborhoods, and it creates more of that two-way interaction with residents as well. With that data, it's important to communicate a clear privacy policy so that people understand exactly what data you are collecting. So those trash bins, it's monitoring the data that goes into them, not who's walking by or anything like that. But it's important for people to know what is being collected and then how long you'll hold on to that data and things like that. And then actually using that data to inform city planning, which we'll get into in the next slide. So one major flavor of data-driven decision-making is performance measurements. And it's really important when measuring performance that you're not just measuring what is available, but that you are at the beginning defining what is meaningful and then figuring out how to get closest to that metric. So on the left, I put an image from a dashboard that I recently made for LA Department of Transportation. And they are paying attention to a few different general areas. So I put an image from our people here, and their concept was that we need to start with thinking about our department and how to optimize performance there. And then that carries through to the rest of the community. So they defined these three broad goals: make the department safe and fulfilling place to work, invest in staff and succession planning. And then within those goals, they defined a number of actions. And what I think is interesting here is that then the data that they're tracking is a measurement of how far along that action is, so percentage complete. And the point that I'm trying to get across here is that sometimes we think that objective data is better data, but what is really meaningful sometimes when it comes to performance is just an understanding of progress, which might be a subjective measurement. But having this data available helps to communicate and helps the department make decisions about how to intervene and get things back on track. On the right here is a dashboard from the California state government about their vaccination program. And this image I really like because it gets to this second point on the slide of what you measure is what you manage. So they're not only tracking vaccinations, but they broke it down here by the Healthy Places Index, or HPI, which is a measure that's used across California as a general indication of need. So what they're measuring, and therefore what they are managing, is to make sure that vaccinations are going to areas that need it the most. Next slide. And finally, when we think about data-driven decision-making, it's truly thinking about community planning and how you want to move forward as a city based on information. So this is an example I really like from Urban 3, and there are a few examples across the country, but this image is from Lafayette County in Louisiana. And they looked at the revenues and costs. So the revenue is above the plane, and then the cost is that red below across the city. And what this model really highlighted is that there was a big cost to draining the bayou in the city. And so it's helpful to understand both the costs and benefits in a single context, so that when you think about how to expand as a city or where to concentrate investment, you have that knowledge at hand, and residents do as well.
Great, thanks, Chelsea. Hi, everyone. I'm Kate Garman. I'm also with CityFi. It's a pleasure to talk with you today. And I just wanted to highlight the third pillar that we were thinking of, which is inclusive innovation. And when we think about innovation at a city, we're thinking about how to be creative, how to bring in new ideas. And that's what we wanted to explore here on this third pillar, is being creative with Elk Grove, and both internal processes, external processes, how we think about our community, the placemaking, and how cities can be agile to handle these new ideas, whether it's in terms of new transportation offerings that come in, or if it's new technologies that are offered. But it's really setting up Elk Grove for success in inviting these new ideas and making sure that they work for the community. So when we think about inclusive innovation, we're talking about these areas. Next slide, please, Christopher. We're also thinking about how we can get information about how the city is performing or it's providing its services from the very important residents of the city. So engaging the community as problem solvers. That's some of your most rich information. As we've talked a lot about data and outreach, it really helps guide the city to understand how people are actually using its services and how to correct or lean in on one area or another with those services that are being provided. It's also aligning this outreach into going where the people are. And if that is where people are going online and wanting their services there, the city can be agile and provide those services in an online way. And it's also making sure from this inclusive perspective that we're taking care of residents that might not also want to go online. So it's innovation is not to say technology only. That is not it at all. It is actually understanding what residents need, including those who may have a difficult time getting on to the internet. Either they don't have a connection, they are nervous to use it, or they don't have the technology, or unbanked residents as well. So it's really inclusive of all these ideas. Next slide, please. Two examples we wanted to have here just to generate some ideas. One is a physical form of innovation. This was a project in Kansas City. I actually worked on it. It was a public-private partnership led by Cisco, Sprint, and some other companies that covered the downtown area of Kansas City, Missouri. And it was along the streetcar corridor, which is 2 miles downtown. It provided these kiosks, which you can see here, someone used. It was a new communication tool. And the city had access to that as well to use some messaging. There were cameras deployed, smart cameras, so we didn't actually see the video, but they were used for the specific purpose to make sure that we could track parking in real time and availability to residents. We could make sure that cars were not blocking the streetcar. And it also provided free public Wi-Fi in that 52 city square block area, which was really critical for helping bridge the digital divide. Next slide, please. It also means not necessarily hardware, but thinking about ways to connect. In Seattle, we did the Innovation Advisory Council, another theme, which is a public-private partnership and working with multiple stakeholders in the area of building a one location for affordable housing. This had not existed. There was a previous site in which that was housed and that no longer existed, and Zillow provided the resources and their data to create one centralized location for both the open market as well as a specific location for people who are exiting homelessness, and worked with the social provider. Next slide. So we just wanted to present these ideas before we talk to you and hear back from you. So Dan, I will turn it over to you.
Great, thanks. Well, we have a couple people on the line here today, so we want to get some thoughts and have a little bit of a discussion here. And feel free to see my screen here. There we go. Okay, so I think we have Jeff and Mark both on the line here. Feel free to add comments in chat as we go through this, and I'll be taking some notes and kind of compiling some ideas here. But we'd love to get some feedback from both of you on, let's start with the first question. What is a smart city to you? How do you define that? As Christopher mentioned, this is, we're just starting this process and really want to think kind of high level vision kind of approach to this before we get into too much detail as we go through this process. But thinking big picture with the different ideas and things that have been shown today, what do you define as a smart city, or how can a smart city work for you, and some of your thoughts around it?
And I'll go ahead and jump in here. This is Jeff Werner. I'm the Engineering Services Manager for the Public Works Department. I'm just tuning in to kind of stay up to the process. I imagine the Public Works Department and the Engineering Services Division will play a vital role in rolling out whatever is decided upon. So again, I'm just here for training and monitoring the process. So I will reserve any comments and defer to the public to let them weigh in.
All right, sounds good. Thanks, Jeff. Well, Mark, I see you have your hand raised. So some initial thoughts and feedback?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you just fine.
And is that Christopher?
This is Dan with MIG. But
oh, hi, Dan. All right. Thank you, Dan. And thank you, Christopher and Jeff and everybody from CityFi. I just want to clarify just a point of information. Am I the only person on this conference call that is not with the City of Elk Grove or CityFi or MIG?
Yeah, sure, Mark, I can jump in. This is Christopher. We had other folks that registered for the event, but you're the only one that's actually joined us for this session. Okay. I know we have others that are registered for the evening session, okay. So we will have to see who joins us for that one as well.
Sure. Well, okay, that makes me feel special because I get some individual attention. And I saw this on, I think it was on an agenda for one of the city council meetings. I also heard the city manager, Jason Berman, mention this workshop and, the workshops that you're going to hold right after public comments during, I think it was the last council meeting. And I know that the city's made, certain effort to publicize it. And, and we have a city of 170,000 people. Everybody's got something going on. They've got their lives and their jobs and their families and their whatever's going on. And I'm so my first observation is that the residents of Elk Grove have, with one exception here, not chosen to attend here. And so I would put the question to you, what does that tell you, the good folks that are on this conference call, about the residents of Elk Grove's level of interest in this subject of Elk Grove being a smart city? I look at it, and I'll tell you basically my overall perspective. I think that the risk has not been addressed, and the risk is that it's going to expose residents to even more electromagnetic radiation, electromagnetic fields in public places than we are already exposed to. And that carries significant health effects, especially from long-term exposure. And I would like to hear about the downside of it, but I will address the question here. What is a smart city to you? Labels are meant, people use labels to simplify things and often to convey either a positive or negative impression. Like if you call somebody a liberal, in many circles, that's a deep, deep, deep insult. And in other circles, it's like, oh yeah, of course. A smart city is a city that listens to its residents. A smart city is a city that makes it a high priority to protect the health and safety and well-being of its residents. That's probably in our city charter here in Elk Grove, or I'd be surprised if it's not, and approaches all the potential projects that it considers with that in mind. You know, do no harm. And you know, technology is a lot more advanced than it was 20 years ago or even 10. And you know, cell phones are virtually indispensable. I have one, although I usually keep it on airplane mode and I don't hold it up to my head, and that's because of the radiation and because it causes brain cancer. But it's indisputable that cell phones are amazingly convenient. And so with this technology, there's a potential to overdo it, you see, to think that if a little is good and more is better, then more and more and more and more and more is best. And that's what I see happening with this smart city discussion. I think there needs to be a line drawn between how much do we really need and how much is going to provide real tangible benefits to the city. I have more to say, but I'll stop there for now. Anybody there?
Oh, we're still here. I'm typing away. No, this is helpful. Well, and the health side of it, it sounds like what you mean is the health risk or potential health risk of the technology itself, as opposed to maybe the benefits of health information getting out. I think Chelsea was mentioning like vaccinations and how those are distributed. You know, that's health as well, but that's using technology to promote health. But just for clarification, you're referring more to the technology itself as potentially being a health risk.
Yes,
right?
Yes, I am. There's a mountain of research, just thousands, literally thousands of studies by independent scientists in peer-reviewed publications, scientific journals, that show that long-term exposure to electromagnetic radiation, and such as we're already getting from cell phones, cell towers, and cell antennas and other electronic devices, causes serious health effects, you know, from headaches to brain cancer and everything in between. Sure.
And as you can see, I'm taking notes. We're recording all this stuff as well, and the meeting's recorded. Just a follow-up thought, though, is I think probably all of us would agree to some extent technology is just massively changing and constantly changing. So if technology evolves and, you know, these risks of infrastructure go away, for lack of a better term, you also mentioned, you know, directly linking the data and the value of the data back to tangible benefits of the community, which I think is a really important point. So I kind of want to get maybe additional thoughts from you on that. Is, you know, certain ways right now as a citizen, you know, data, regardless how it's corrected or what infrastructure is being used, but ways data could be helpful as we start to think about ways to really get at the core needs or issues of the community, you know, whether that is transportation or infrastructure or trash collection or access to education. You know, this gets to a little bit of our next question or moving down next question. But what do you see as some of the technology sort of challenges or maybe even benefits facing Elk Grove in the near term, or ways that technology can be used to help the city, help the residents?
Okay, that's a couple different questions. I'll tell you my answer to the green one, that says, what are the top issues you see in Elk Grove? As we're talking about a smart city, it's super clear, it's crystal clear, and the top issue is health, and that is not exposing people in public places to more electromagnetic radiation than we're already getting. But to answer your previous question, like how can the data actually be used? You see, that raises a critical point. And I believe that the city council made some decision where they authorized the staff to do this process that we're doing right now, right? This meeting today, the one you're going to have this evening, and maybe there's going to be another meeting just like this. So I think that the city council authorized the staff to do this, and so the council must have had something in mind that being a smart city in some form or other will be good for the residents. And I don't know what they thought the benefits would be, You know, I really think that the process should be resident driven by the residents. So if the residents have been asking the city, you know, I would like to have more data about this subject, whatever that subject is. And if it's something that the city can provide and it's not confidential information or anything, that I think that's the type of information that he should be able to provide. Now, anybody with a smartphone these days, you can find almost anything. You can find a YouTube video on how to change the oil in your car or how to build a house. I mean, you can research anything. So we're not like we don't have to go to a library anymore. There's the world's information is at our fingertips, literally, and it's carried in our pockets or tucked into our bras for women. So I don't think that there's a problem there. I want to just address a couple things, examples that came up. The last speaker, Ms. Garman, when she began speaking, there was a photograph of a fire hydrant and the sign that says, "Hello, I'm a fire hydrant, talk to me." That, in my opinion, is overkill. I can speak for myself and tell you, I do not ever want to have a conversation with a fire hydrant. Moreover, I don't want the fire hydrant to be irradiating me as I walk by it or drive by it. And it also raises the question of the data that fire hydrant is going to be gathering or collecting. You know, people, I think another key issue here, I'd call this the secondary issue, is privacy. And it has to do with the data, you know, and I would like to know, is CityFi going to collect this data? Is MIG going to collect this data? Or if those companies are not collecting it, are you going to receive it from, you know, the hardware manufacturers? And then that, you know, there's a big privacy concern there. When, let's see, tracking vaccinations. Well, if you believe that vaccinations are a good thing, then I don't know. I suppose tracking might be a smart thing to do. There were a couple other things earlier. Oh, yeah, in my opinion, the city of Elk Grove does not need children to be quote unquote involved in the process. Children spend enough time on their cell phones as it is. Parents will tell you, teachers will tell you, it's a big problem already. And I really don't like the idea of the city collecting data on children and whatever data you can get from their cell phones. I think that's one of the lines that ought to be drawn. When Story Bellows was speaking, she said she's talking about one of the benefits of a smart city. She said, you can ensure that a fire truck or ambulance doesn't have to wait at a red light. She said that at 11:49 this morning. Now, are you telling me that currently in the city of Elk Grove, the way our red lights and traffic signs and traffic light systems are set up, that a fire truck or an ambulance does have to wait at a red light?
Yeah, Mark, let me jump in on that. I think it's a good example and something broader we can talk about a little bit.
All right.
So, I mean, you're right in that all of our traffic signals have sensors on them. They're optical sensors which gather a strobe light that comes off the vehicle. And that strobe light, the sensor reading it, then causes the signal in that direction to then change from whatever status this is to get into a green to help clear the intersection. I think the example Story's talking about, and I think it's a good one as sort of a use case, is those are independent sensors at each intersection location. So let's imagine for a moment, your house is on fire. God forbid, but just go with me for this example. You call 911, or maybe your home is monitored by an alarm company and they call 911 on your behalf. So they end up getting in touch with a dispatcher, either a police dispatcher at our facility or fire dispatch for the county. There's a fire dispatch is commingled across the county. So you end up talking to the dispatcher, "Oh my goodness, my house is on fire, please send help." Okay. They get your address, they dispatch from the nearest fire station that can respond. That dispatcher knows where they're dispatching from and where your location is. What if, hypothetically, they could plug in, they could, as a dispatch operation, they can determine based upon real-time traffic information that our signals are gathering, you know, it's traffic count, it's based on you know, the existing loop sensors that are in the ground or optical sensors that some of our newer signals have, where they're basically just counting cars going through and we can see the directions of travel. They can determine, okay, this is the most effective route to get to where they're being dispatched from to where they're going to. And then we can actually tell, the system can push out that route information to all the traffic signals that are in that path of travel. And that well in advance of that emergency vehicle getting to the intersection, the signal is green. I bring that up as an example because yes, fire trucks or other emergency responding vehicles in the city have those optical displays. The sensors are getting tripped, but there's a line of sight to that technology. It can only go a couple hundred feet, maybe 1,000 feet, however far it can actually pick up that strobing effect. If the signal knows substantially in advance, and I'm saying minutes in advance, then it can clear that intersection sooner and cause delays for the cross traffic. Now you've decreased the response times, you've increased the efficiency of getting that emergency staff there to the site, to your home. That's valuable minutes that maybe they're able to more substantially save the structure or save someone that's trapped within the building. So I think that's what we're sort of talking about. And in that example, there's no new sensors, there's no new things from that sort of technology that's out in the field. What it involves is upgrading the equipment that's in the traffic control cabinets. What it involves is the communication between central dispatch and the cabinet so that we can have that real-time communication with our equipment. You know, what can we do to improve the throughput of that data so we can talk to all of our signals simultaneously? We don't always have that ability right now. So I think that's one good example of that. And I know you bring up a lot, and those are fair points about the amount of technology that's out in the field and what that technology is doing passively that folks aren't aware of. And I agree with you, the data side of it, absolutely. And the privacy issues are one. In fact, a specific work element in our scope is to talk about the privacy issues. It'll be in a later phase of the work as we get later into the year on it. And coming up with those policies and restrictions on what's collected, how long it's being kept for, making folks aware of that so that they have the ability to inform themselves and make decisions around that. As a city, we don't want to keep more data. Just tell you right now, we don't want to keep more data than we absolutely have to because there are liability issues around it. So are there other aspects that we can engage, that we can use to collect information, or that are just generally how we function as a city? How we use, maybe it's just a matter of how we use the data we already collect better. And what are those sorts of efforts that we can undertake?
Okay. Is this Dan?
No, this is Christopher.
Christopher. Oh, Christopher. Okay. Yes. And you know that I sent you an email back when I registered for this. And in a moment, I'm going to open that up because as you recall, I mentioned I had a number of questions. But before I get to that, I just want to address what you just asked and some other things that the speaker said earlier. You know, as far as data that Elk Grove residents need, and I don't think this requires, you know, sensors all over the city or new radiation transmitting devices. And you've probably heard me say this, Mr. Jordan. I think that there is one particular type of data that the residents need, and some have asked for, and almost none has gotten, and that is notice in writing, direct notice to the residents from the city as to when one of the wireless carriers has applied for a permit to install a new cell antenna on anywhere. It's usually on a city-owned light pole, and also notice for when the permit, you know, has been issued. But it's the earlier notice is more important because it would give the residents notice of their opportunity to look at the application and to actually, tell the city whether they think it's a good idea to have a cell antenna on this city light pole. So that's one use of data that could be done. It's not being done now. Back to the fire trucks in this scenario you painted about the house on fire. If you can speed up the system and do everything you described without more electronic devices transmitting electromagnetic radiation, great. I'm for it. That would be fine. I can tell you I've lived in California since 2000. I've driven over 200,000 miles on my car. It's an old, reliable car. And not once have I seen a fire truck or an ambulance wait at a red light for more than a few seconds. And we all know that they have a way around that, and it's called their horn. The horn on one of these fire trucks is so loud, you can hear it a mile away. And people are very good. Drivers are very good about getting out of the way. They pull over to the side of the road. They stop if it's possible to stop, to let the fire truck and ambulance go by. So, I would say, how much is it going to accelerate or shorten the driving time that the fire truck has to take to reach the house? That can be quantified. What else? Well, I want to bring up what does innovation look like? Innovation looks like use of technology that's driven by what the residents say they need. We don't have a bayou here in Elk Grove, so there's not that. If we had a bayou, and I guess the city of Lafayette, Louisiana has a bayou, and it cost them a certain amount of money to maintain it or whatever they had to do, there's no way around that, So it's helpful to know that, but like we have levees. Sacramento and the Sacramento area have levees, right? And the levees have to be maintained. Is that up to the city? I don't think so. I think it's the Army Corps of Engineers, but it's an existing natural feature that is not going to go away, and there's a certain cost associated with maintaining the levees, and you can't really do anything about that. So I question the benefit of having more in-depth data on how much that costs. But I do want to open that email that I sent to you, Mr. Jordan. Let's see. Is it all right if I post some of these questions that I asked you by the email?
Sure, Mark. Yeah, we can go through that. I think we've got the time and the space to do that. Good.
Now, some of these I've already mentioned, but I'll just tell you the recommendations that I've made, which I still make. Minimize the number of wirelessly communicating electronic gadgets that are installed. Require the proponents to justify every type or category of electronic gadget that they want to install. Explain why so many are needed based on the actual technological parameters, including the range of the proposed electronic gadgets. What we learned in the discussion of cell antennas is that, the chief executive officer of Verizon said in a video back in 2018, we're now designing the network for over 2,000 feet from transmitter to receiver. That's the CEO. And yet the promoters, the salesmen from Verizon and AT&T that go to the city council meetings and speak to the council and so on, are prone to saying, well, the signal only travels like 400 or 500 feet, or maybe 700 at the most. So there's a big difference between a signal that has an effective range of 2,000 feet and one that has an effective range of 700 feet. And that, of course, affects the number of the electronic gadgets that is really necessary for the system to work. So I think the city should go with the minimum and require, a technological justification for why do you need this many. Be truly transparent about the corporate and government use of the data collected. So I referred to that earlier when I mentioned privacy and the use of the data. It also raises a question about the Public Records Act. If the city collects data in connection with this program, and I don't know, there are multiple ways it could be done, but is that data going to be a public record? And how much expense does the city want to incur in maintaining those records and responding to Public Records Act requests, which, there will be Public Records Act requests. This is a key one: fully justify the purported benefits. I want to talk about the Internet of Things, and we've had a mention here of autonomous vehicles. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you remember the cartoon, The Jetsons. Well, George Jetson had a spacecraft, and he would get into the spacecraft and it would levitate, and that's how he traveled and got to work and home and all that sort of stuff. And I think that I know that there are cars that have been made that are, self-driving cars. And I just have deep doubts about whether they'll ever be truly safe. Some of those autonomous cars have run people over and killed them. And that involved the manufacturer in a lawsuit, and probably the city that allowed them also in a lawsuit. So you got to consider that. But the question really is, how much of a benefit is it to have an autonomous car, and how much risk is the city willing to take in terms of saturating the environment with electromagnetic radiation to have that benefit? And it's difficult, but I really think an attempt must be made to put numbers on these things, because if you describe a benefit and you describe a disadvantage, well, how do you weigh them? Suppose you say all the benefits here, these are on the left side of the page, and all the cons or disadvantages are on the right side of the page. And how's a person supposed to objectively evaluate them? Well, they need to be quantified to the extent that they can be. Other recommendations: allow individual residents and businesses to opt out of having smart city electronic gadgets placed near their homes or businesses. So if I own a restaurant, or I rent space in an office building for my company, and I decide that I don't want to have the new devices associated with the smart city to be, near my restaurant, I should have the choice to opt out. It should not be up to CityFi or MIG or even the city. It should be up to the business owner. And similarly for an individual resident. If these sensors and transmitters and so on, receivers, are going to go in residential neighborhoods, I think that every resident should have a right to simply opt out. The next recommendation, this goes back to the privacy issue: allow individual residents to opt out of having their data saved. So if I say, do not save any data that you could get from my cell phone, my smartphone, I should be able to do that and require the company's providers to comply with such a request. And then the last two I put in this email. Oh, yes. Yeah, what we've heard is presentations about why the city should become a smart city. And what I think is equally valuable for the city to consider is consider the argument that becoming a smart city is going to be a precursor to Elk Grove becoming a surveillance state. And what I mean by surveillance state, we've all heard of the novel 1984 by George Orwell, and he's talking about a situation that seemed extremely far-fetched. He wrote the book in, I believe, 1948, called it 1984, and we are there. We are there in so many ways today, and there are more and more data being gathered. It's the corporations and the governments, and they will know everything about you. People, now I'm not trying to blame a smart city for what's the present situation with smartphones, but most of us in the smartphone that we carry in our pocket, there are 40 or 50 different apps, and there's the default setting for every app is to keep track of your location. Now you can turn that off in every app if you do that. And of course you can turn your phone off or put it on airplane mode too. But if you're walking around with your phone on and the default settings on all of your apps, there are 40 or 50 apps that at all times are recording your location. So we are in a surveillance state already. And what my concern here and my recommendation is to not make it worse. And I think this needs to be fully explored. Is this a slippery slope? Are we, the city, if the city goes forward with a smart city plan, are we stepping onto a slippery slope from which, it's going to be a quick and a steep decline. And because it's slippery, we're not going to be able to slow down the fall or climb back up it. And finally, this is related also to the discussion of cell antennas. What we learned in the discussion of cell antennas was that there's a federal law called the Telecommunications Act of 1996, and it partially preempts city regulatory action over the placement and construction and modification of cell towers and cell antennas. Mm-hmm. And because of that, the city council was reluctant to consider many of the residents' proposals, although the city council did, I would say, a pretty good job of keeping cell antennas away from our homes by prohibiting them from being immediately adjacent to the front yard of a residential dwelling. All right, now we're not talking about cell antennas, we're talking about various electronic gadgets for a smart city. And there's, as far as I know, the city could say, thank you, but no, we are smart enough as it is. Our residents have all the information that they need. They have internet access, unless, you know, there are a few residents that live in the east part of the city, in the rural area, and they don't have as good internet access, but, you know, 98% of us, we do. And thank you, but no. I believe that it's important for the city to understand that the city can say no to a smart city. I will stop there.
Yeah. Well, and thank you. This is great feedback, and we appreciate, again, your time, Mark, as well as we go through this and talk through these ideas. You know, you hit on a lot of different important topics here, and we have chat and additional comments of, you know, from Story and others at CityFi of, you know, being able to opt out, and, you know, how this data and information is collected and the sensitivity behind it, but also the infrastructure as well. You know, we are obviously having another workshop this evening in kind of a similar format, but we did record the presentation piece, and, you know, can look at ways of getting surveys out and other communications, because we really want to gather this input from the community, residents and business community as well, you know, as we go into this process. As Christopher mentioned up front, you know, this project, which is to develop the Smart City Plan, is really to coalesce the city of Elk Grove's approach to this topic and what policies or actions are coalesced in that. Because so much activity is going on, and like you said, you know, technology is evolving, and autonomous vehicle or autonomous things are being tested or developed. So, you know, this process is really around the city's approach and policy towards this as well. But with that, maybe I'll wrap it back to Chris here. I know you did have I believe one slide on a sort of a wrap up or next steps piece.
Could I say, Dan, before we do that, could I say two more things?
Sure.
Okay. Priorities. Here's one thing I think should be a high priority, and this will help everybody with broadband internet access. The city should commit and develop a citywide network of fiber optic cables all the way up, leading all the way up to the residents or the business. This will give people super high speed internet access, and, you know, it's not going to address all of these things, but one of the things that was mentioned earlier in the presentations was, well, we want to bridge the digital divide. Fiber optics have the advantage that it's the fastest and the most secure and the most reliable method of internet access. And then the last thing I want to say about the Internet of Things, you know, there are a lot of creative people out there, and they've been working their butts off to come up with more and more wireless gadgets. And I remember hearing about some of these 4 years ago, literally, that I thought were overkill. But for example, there is a diaper that you can buy that has some kind of a moisture sensor in there, and it has a little radio transmitter right down in the child's crotch. And of course, it hooks up with an app on your smartphone. So if you're the mother or the father, you will get a message from the app on your smartphone when your baby has wet its diaper. There's another one that I heard of literally February 2017. A friend of mine found it online. This is another part of the Internet of Things. And pardon me for being a little bit graphic here, but somebody had invented a wireless gadget and an app to go with it that was to count when a couple is having sex. I'm not going to beat around the bush here. The purpose of the electronic device was to count the number of strokes that the couple had during their sex. And so that data was transmitted from the transmitter to the app on the phone, and then they could would do whatever they wanted with that information later on. And so my point here, I'm not trying to gross you out, but it's that it comes back to what I said earlier. The possibility for overkill is very large, and it's already happening. And that's what I think the city should avoid.
No, understood. Absolutely. Yeah, the message is well taken. No, thank you.
Okay, well, thank you, Mark, for participating and giving us that stuff. And I will also say I do have the emails you sent. I forwarded, I think, the first one over to the team, so they would have that as part of notes that we were collecting on feedback. I'll go back and look at your one from this morning as well, and make sure we've got those included in our notes.
Okay.
But for certainly your benefit, or for others that are going to be watching the video later, I do want to highlight just a couple next step pieces. First off, we are planning I'll call it a workshop for now, but it'll be an agenda item at the City Council at a date hopefully in April. We don't have the date pinned down exactly yet, but certainly there's 2 opportunities there to do that, schedules permitting. We'll go through, to a degree, an abbreviated version of this to sort of lay some of the groundwork for the council and talk through some of the initial pillars. We'll share the outreach we've been collecting thus far, which has included this, as well as some other sort of broader investigation and whatever prior survey information we have, and others to sort of set the stage for it. We'll be using the city website to communicate broadly about the project. There's some initial overview information on the effort at the URL that's listed. There are certainly more meetings to come, so please make sure that you're signed up for the email distribution list. We're starting to build that for the project, so folks can sign up there, and we'll get updates posted as we go throughout. So that is everything we had for today. And thank you, Mark, and for participating, and for those that are watching afterwards, thank you for watching the video, and certainly feel free to reach out to us with other comments and questions. We'll add that to all the data we're collecting. So. And thanks very much to the team for helping us out today and putting this together. Excited to see where we go from here. So thanks, everybody, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
All right.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.
Bye-bye.